Many years afterward, most of the aged boys at whose long ago bar mitzvah receptions in a vanished New York City, a young magician named Joe Cavalier had performed his brisk, lively, all but wordless act, could summon only fragmentary memories of the entertainer. Some of the men were able to recall a slender, quiet young man in a fancy blue cutaway who spoke accented English and seemed hardly older than they. Another, an avid reader of comic books, recalled that Joe Cavalier had invited him to drop by the Empire offices one day with his parents. Joe had given him a tour and sent him home with an armload of free comic books and a drawing, which he still had, of himself standing next to the escapist. Yet another remembered that Joe worked with an entire menagerie of artificial animals, a collapsible fake fur rabbit, goldfish carved from a carrot, a rather mangy stuffed parakeet that, to the surprise of spectators, remained perched on the magician's hand while its cage vanished into thin air. I saw him cutting up the carrots in the men's room. This gentleman recalled. In the bowl of water, they really did look like little fish. Stanley Konigsberg, however, whose bar mitzvah reception marked the last known appearance of the amazing Cavalieri, retained for the rest of his life. Like young Leon Douglas, pipe-bombed sax, an ineradicable memory of our hero. An amateur magician himself, he had first seen Joe performing at the St. Regis for his classmate at Horace Mann, Ray Kahn, and had been impressed enough by Joe's natural movements, his solemnity, and his flawless presentations of the Mister's dream, Rossini's location, and the stab deck to insist that Joe be engaged to baffle his own relatives and schoolmates at the Hotel Trevi 2 months later, and of Mr. Konigsberg's youthful admiration and the unfailing kindness shown him by its object had not sufficed to preserve the amazing Cavalieri in his memory for the next 60 years. Then the singular performance of Joe gave at the Hotel Trevi at the evening of December 6, 1941, undoubtedly would have been enough. Joe arrived an hour before the reception began, and was his habit to check the disposition of the Trevi's ballroom, salt a few aces and $50, and go over the order of events with Manny Zen, the band leader, whose 14 sensations, riotous in their mariachi shirts, were setting up on the bandstand behind them. "How are they hanging?" said Joe, trying out an expression he had just heard in the subway on his way uptown. He pictured a row of pages from a calendar. Having on a shiny string, he was young, he was making money hand over fist, and his little brother, after 6 months of quarantine, bureaucratic dithering, and those terrible days last week when it seemed that the State Department might, at the last moment, cancel all the children's entry visas, was on his way. Thomas would be here in 3 more days, here in New York City. "Hey, kid," Zen said, squinting a little mistrustfully at Joe, but finally shaking the hand Joe proffered. They had worked together twice before. "Where's your sombrero?" "Sorry, I didn't. Our theme is south of the border." Zen reached behind his head and lifted a black sombrero embroidered with silver thread up onto his balding pate. He was a good-looking, portly man with a pencil mustache. "Sid?" The trombonist had been chatting up one of the waitresses in a pink beribboned dress with Latin flounces. Sid turned around, an eyebrow arched. Manny Zen raised his hands in the air and threw his head back. "Number 3. The trombonist nodded. "Hit it," he said to the band. The Sensations broke into a spirited bounce version of the Mexican hat dance. They played 4 bars, and then Manny Zen cut his throat with a finger. "So where's your Mexican hat?" "No one told me," said Joe. He smiled. "Beside to which I'm permitted only to use the topper," he added, pointing to the loaded silk hat on his head, which he had purchased secondhand at Louis Tannen's, or else maybe the Mexican Magicians Union will complain. Zen narrowed his eyes again. "You're drunk," he said. "Not at all. You're acting goofy." "My brother is coming," said Joe. And then, just to see how it sounded, added, Emma and I am getting married. That is, I hope I am. I have decided I am going to ask her tonight." Zen blew his nose. "Mazel tov," he said, giving the blot on his handkerchief a chiromantic squint. "Only I thought you guys were experts at getting out of chains." "Excuse me, Mr. Cavalieri," said Stanley Konigsberg, appearing rather magically at Joe's side. "But that's what I wanted to ask you." "You can call me Joe." "Joe, sorry, okay. I was wondering, do you ever do escapes?" "At one time," said Joe, "but I had to give it up," he frowned. "How long have you been standing there?" "Don't worry. I won't tell anyone you hit a queen of hearts in the centerpiece of table 7, said Stanley, "if that's what you're worried about." "I did not do any such thing," said Joe. He winked at Manny Zen and, with a firm hand on Stanley's shoulder, steered the boy out of the ballroom and into the gilded corridor. Guests were taking off their coats, shaking the rain from their umbrellas. What kind of things could you escape from? Stanley wanted to know. Chains, ropes, boxes, trunks, bags? Could you do it jumping off of a bridge or a building? What's so funny? "You remind me of someone," Joe said. That same evening, Rosa shoved her paint box, a folded canvas tarp, a yardstick, and a small stepladder into the back of a taxi and headed uptown to the apartment at the Josephine. The echoing emptiness of the place, a tin plate rattle in the ears, unnerved her, and although with Joe's approval she had hastily called Macy's to order a dining table and chairs, some basic kitchen things, and bedroom furniture, there would be no time to furnish the rooms properly before Thomas arrived. It occurred to her that having gone from the cramped jumble of a two-family flat on Dula Street to the provisional pandemonium of a convent refectory to the packed-in oil tin of a stateroom on the Ark of Miriam, the boy might actually welcome a bit of space and emptiness, but all the same she wanted him to feel that the place at which he had arrived at long last was home, or a kind of home. She had tried to think of ways she could accomplish this. She knew enough about 13-year-old boys to be fairly certain that a plush bathrobe, a bouquet of flowers, or ruffled canopy on the bed was not going to do the trick. She thought that a dog or a kitten might have been nice, but pets were not allowed in the building. She asked Joe about his brother's favorite meal, color, book, song, but Joe had proven quite ignorant of such preferences. Rosa was irritated with him. She had said he was impossible, until she saw that he was, for once, pained by his ignorance. It was the mark not of his usual Luftmensch obliviousness, but of the chasm of strange separation that had opened up between the brothers in the last 2 years. She apologized at once and went to trying to think what she could do for Thomas, until finally she'd had the idea, which struck them both as a nice one, of painting the blank expanse of his bedroom with a mural. It was not just that she wanted Thomas to feel at home. She wanted him to like her instantly, right away. And she hoped that the mural, whether it softened the edges of his arrival or not, would at the very least stand as an offer of friendship, as a hand extended in welcome from his American big sister. But intermingled with, secretly bubbling beneath these other motives for the gesture, was concealed a desire that had nothing to do with Thomas Kavalier. Rosa was practicing, beginning to dabble on the walls of a boy's bedroom, with the idea of becoming a mother. This morning her doctor had called to confirm the tale of a missed period, and of a week of sudden squalls and unexpected flare-ups of emotion, such as the one that had sent her into hysterics over the loan of an old pocket square. Thomas was going to be an uncle. That was how she had decided that she was going to put it to Joe. When she got into the apartment, she first changed into a pair of dungarees and an old shirt of Joe's, and put her hair back with a kerchief. Then she went into the bedroom that was going to be Thomas's and spread out the tarp on the floor. She had never painted a mural before, but she had talked it over with her father, who had been involved in the fracas over the Rivera murals on Rockefeller Center, and who knew many artists who had worked on murals for the WPA. Rosa had wrestled for a long time with the proper subject. Characters from nursery rhymes, wooden soldiers, fairies, and frog princes, and gingerbread houses. Such motifs would be considered hopelessly puerile by a boy of 13. She considered doing a New York scene. Tall buildings, taxicabs, traffic cops, the camel sign blowing smoke rings toward the ceiling, or perhaps some corny American montage with redwood trees and cotton plants and lobsters. She wanted it to be sort of generally American, but also to relate in some way to the specific life Thomas was going to be leading here. Then she had started thinking about Joe and the kind of work that he did. She suspected that Thomas Kavalier was going to be learning a good deal of his English from the pages of Vampire comics. Well, she would not have felt comfortable doing a mural that featured the Monitor, the Four Freedoms, or, God knew, Luna Moth. The idea of heroes, American heroes, intrigued her. She went to the public library and checked out a big book with impressive Rockwell Kent-style woodcuts called Heroes and Legends of the American People. The larger-than-life figures of Paul Bunyan, John Henry, Pecos Bill, Mike Fink, and the rest. Her favorite was the original Man of Steel. Joe Magarek struck her as perfectly suited to the mural form, and not beneath the contempt of a boy to whom they would probably be largely unknown. What was more, Rosa had taken to thinking of Joe himself as a hero. He had paid, out of his own pocket, for 15 of the children who were now steaming across the Atlantic. Though she would not put Joe into the mural, she decided to include an image of Harry Houdini, that immigrant boy from Central Europe, just to connect the theme of the mural that much more directly to Thomas's life. She had made dozens of preliminary sketches and a 2x3 cartoon of the mural, which she now set about transferring by means of a simple grid to the largest of the room's walls. It was tricky work, laying out the guidelines of the walls with the yardstick. First, the horizontals, moving the stepladder across from left to right 3 feet at a hop, then the verticals, easy enough at the bottom, but flirting more and more dangerously with wobbliness as she drew nearer to the top and was forced to go up on tiptoe. It required far more patience than she possessed, and several times she came close to abandoning the grid and just trying to sketch the thing out freehand on the wall. But she reminded herself that patience was a cardinal virtue in a mother. God knew her own mother had had little enough and kept to her careful plan. By 10 o'clock, she had finished laying out the guidelines. Her shoulders ached, and her neck and her knees, and she felt that before she started in on transferring the gridded cartoon to the wall, she would go for a walk around the block for a sandwich or a cigarette. She might run into Joe. He ought to be through with his show by now and on his way up to meet her. So she pulled on her coat and took the elevator back down to the lobby. She walked up to the corner of 79th Street, where there was a late-night grocery. Later, Rosa would imagine that, like a cat or a spirit camera trained on a dying person, she had seen her lost happiness at the instant of its passing. As she was paying for her Philip Morris's, she happened to glance down at the Sunday papers stacked in front of the counter. Bulldog editions, hot off the press. In the upper right-hand corner of the Herald, there was an extra boxed in red. She read it 5 times with all her heart and attention, but the city amount of information it conveyed never increased or, then or afterward, made any better sense. The 10 lines of tentative, bland prose said only that a boat filled with refugees, many from Central Europe, most, if not all of them, believed to be Jewish children, was missing in the Atlantic off the Azores and believed lost. There was no mention, as there would not be for several more hours, of a U-boat, a forced evacuation, a sudden storm tearing it out of the northeast. Rosa stood there for a moment, her lungs filled with smoke, unable to exhale. Then she looked up at the storekeeper, who was watching her with interest. Evidently, something quite engrossing was going on in her face. What should she do? Was he still at Trevi? Was he on his way up to the Josephine, as they had planned? Had he heard the news? She drifted out to the curb and fretted for a moment longer. Then she decided she had better just go back to the apartment and wait for him. She was sure that he would eventually come looking for her there, whether in ignorance or grief. Just as she was coming to this decision, however, a taxicab pulled up and let out an elderly couple in evening clothes. Rosa brushed past them and climbed into the back of the cab. "The Trevi," she said. She sat in a dark corner of the taxi. The light came and went, and in the mirror of her compact, her reflection was intermittently brave. She closed her eyes and tried to recite a snatch of a Buddhist prayer her father had taught her, claiming it had a calming effect. It had little apparent impact on her father, and she wasn't even sure she had the words right. Om Mani Padme Om. Somehow it did make her feel calmer. She said it all the way from 79th Street to the curb outside by the Trevi. By the time she stepped out of the cab, she had pulled herself fairly together. She came into the severe marble reception hall with its icy chandeliers and went up to the desk to inquire. From the lobby came the somehow baleful laughter of the famous fountain. "The magician was a friend of yours?" said the clerk with an unaccountably hostile air. "He cut out hours ago." "Oh." It hit her like a blow. He was supposed to come up to the apartment after the performance. The fact that he had not done so meant that something terrible had happened to him. And in its wake, in possession of this knowledge, he had not wanted to see her. Is anyone... "There's the bar mitzvah boy now," the clerk said, pointing to a skinny little kid in a three-piece pink suit lolling on one of the watered silk couches in the lobby. "Why don't you ask him?" Rosa went over, and the boy introduced himself as Stanley Königsberg. Rosa told him she was looking for Joe, that she had some very bad news to give him. Oh, she had some wonderful news, too, but how would she ever be able to tell him? He would think she was trying to make some horrible equivalency, then it was only one of the monstrous coincidences of life. "I think he already knows," Stanley Königsberg said. He was a squat boy, small for his age, with crooked spectacles and coarse brown hair. The suit was incredible, trousers trimmed with the white braid pockets and buttonholes with white frogs, precisely the color of humiliation itself. "Is it about that boat that sank?" "Yes," Rosa said. "His little brother was on it. A boy about your age." "Geez," he fidgeted with the end of his brown necktie, unable to make eye contact with Rosa. "That explains it, I guess." "That explains what?" Rosa wanted to ask him, but she stuck to the more pressing question. "Do you know where he went?" she said. "No, ma'am, I'm sorry. How long ago did he leave?" "Oh, 2 hours at least, maybe even more." "Wait here," Rosa said. "Will you wait here, please?" "I guess I kind of have to." He pointed to the doors of the Trevi's ballroom. "My parents aren't finished arguing." Rosa went to a pay telephone and called Sammy and Joe's apartment, but there was no answer. And that was when she remembered that Sammy had gone out of town for the weekend with Tracy Bacon to the Jersey Shore of all places. She was going to have to try to track him down. Next, she had the operator call the superintendent of the Josephine, Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Dorsey grumbled and warned her not to make a habit of it. But when she told him it was urgent, he went up and checked the apartment for her. "No," he said when he returned to the phone. There was nobody there, and no note. Rosa hung up and went back to Stanley Königsberg. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Well, I guess he was upset, but nobody knew. Everybody else was pretty upset when they heard. My Uncle Mort works for the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. It's a wire service." "Yes." So we came in.
Sorry, Raymond. I'm asking everybody to leave because we need to use this space for a meeting with